Hello, everyone. Welcome to an all new episode of the Indic Explorer Show. I'm your host, Vineet. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. We need all your support. So, yoga and Tantra and a lot of Indian philosophical and spiritual practices have gained a lot of traction in the Western world. It's happened especially from the 60s with the Beatles and, a lot of gurus from India as well going over there. And there are a lot of people who actually get into yoga and get into the yogic practice come to India. So I have a very interesting guest with me today who has her own experience with these things, and we are going to talk deeply about this. Tatyana Wright, namaste.
Namas-
Tatyana, welcome to the show.
Namaste. Thank you so much for having me.
So for the people who don't know about you, why don't you introduce yourself briefly?
Okay, sure. Thank you. So, my name is Tatyana Wright, and I'm the host of the Conscious Diva podcast. My background is as a television producer. I worked in TV for decades, and more recently, I've become a spiritual transformation coach based on my spiritual interests in yoga and the practices that I personally do. I now teach others to step into the truth of who they are. A better phrase for that, I suppose, is becoming self-realized.
So let's get into your journey. How exactly did you get into yoga? That the story.
So I'm almost 50, so I've been doing this for a long time. And I started, my journey has actually, it's been lifelong. The practice of yoga is lifelong, and it doesn't really matter what age you get interested in. Wherever you're at is the right moment for you. But for me, as a child, from babyhood up to age 7, I lived in Bangkok, Thailand. And so I was exposed to the spiritual traditions of Buddhism in Bangkok, and it was amazing to be a child living in that period in the late 70s and early 80s, and just to witness that way of life. So from the get-go, I was really interested and intrigued in all of this. And then just before I turned 8, we moved to Sydney, Australia, where I grew up. And it was a very different, contrasting, a very, very different environment. It would probably be like similar to moving from, Mumbai or Delhi to Sydney. Almost the same in terms of the traffic and the amount of people and the temples everywhere, and, sort of the chaos, but also, the festivals and, flowers everywhere. So just a completely different environment. When I was about 12 or 13, around there, I was introduced to TM, the practice of transcendental meditation, through my father, who had these interests himself. And he had a guru, a family guru, who initiated us into, which is unique for a Western family living in Australia to have. And he directly had lived with Maharishi in Rishikesh, in his ashram, which is today known as the Beatles ashram. And so he, you could say, was like a direct disciple, so to speak, of Maharishi. And so at that time in the 80s, these teachers of TM wore suits. They were very clean cut. They did not have beards. They didn't wear malas, and that was the trend of the time, was to introduce corporate people, CEOs in the West, and other people who were not running companies into the practice. But it was really targeted at this group of people. And even Deepak Chopra at that time was a TM teacher and was doing this too. And so that was our whole family. My brother, my mother, and my father and myself, we were all initiated into TM. We were given the mantra, and I immediately resonated with the practice. And I don't know if it's because I was exposed as a child in Bangkok to the Buddhist teachings, but there was something about this that I understood. There was more to this practice, and that it came from a Vedic tradition, and it was always something that I had an interest in. And then fast forward a few years later, when I was 18, I was introduced to yoga. A girlfriend and I went to practice in Sydney at a studio. It was an Iyengar yoga studio. I had just heard about yoga, but I wasn't familiar with the practice, the asanas, or anything. I didn't understand, didn't know how it would affect me. And the first moment I went into downward dog, I could feel the shift energetically in my body. I knew this is the practice for me. I was not into going to the gym and working out on, gym equipment and at that time aerobics were really big, going to aerobic classes with the music and, sort of, I don't know what your age group is for your audience, but, the Jane Fonda workout videos on VHS, all this kind of stuff, the leotards, it was really funny. So that was sort of the exercise practice of that era. Didn't resonate with me, and I went to a few, but anyway, so then a couple of years later, when I was 22, I moved to New York City, and I've lived in the US now for 25, 26 years. And so I immediately found a yoga studio in Soho where I was living, and the Jivamukti yoga studio. And it was great to practice and go there and see how many people, pretty much everybody were Westerners. And at that time, that's when I was introduced to the practice of kirtan. I wasn't familiar with kirtan. I wasn't familiar with bhakti, the practice of bhakti. But there was something in that practice that just called to me, spoke to me, and resonated with me with the chanting. And I didn't know that we were chanting the names of the divine, if you will, or like the goddesses, various gods and goddesses, Hindu gods and goddesses, and Shiva or, Durga, or whoever, right? I didn't know Lakshmi, didn't know who they were, but it felt energetically really good. And I could observe the shifts in my body that were taking place. And so as time went on, I wanted to explore more. I've always been a spiritual seeker. And I'd also noticed that it helped me with my job in television as I got older, and as my career in TV, I guess got better I had more responsibility, I should say. There's a lot more stress comes with that. And I noticed that in the times when I was consistently practicing yoga and meditating, it's not, I don't want to say nothing bothered me, but I was able to manage myself and my stress and my time. And then as I became a mother, like all these things, those practices really helped support my ability to deal with life, and just in general. And when my two children were, so by the time I was in my 30s, I was then discovered Kundalini, the practice of Kundalini as taught by Yogi Bhajan. And what was interesting about that practice, even though Yogi Bhajan isn't necessarily linked to any lineage per se, it's a syncretic practice that blends different things. For me, because I already had an understanding of mantra and chanting, so with kirtan, I took those for myself, what I was getting out of those practices, and just sort of absorbed that in the Kundalini class. I enjoyed the exercise aspect of it. Right, there's a spiritual aspect to it, but the way they're practicing the kriyas and the asanas is much more in an exercise like, with the repetitions of how many times you're doing the moves and so on. So I got a lot out of it. I never subscribed to the theories of that practice. I always kept a distance from it and just allowed myself again energetically to just, feel into what the practices were, how I was benefiting from the practices, and keeping a distance, because I didn't ever subscribe to the philosophy. There was something about it where I was like, I don't know about this, but it worked. It worked for me, and that's what mattered, was like, okay, something in this is working, and I'm going to continue practicing. Now, that interestingly led me into, because there was a lot of Tantric Buddhist aspects in that, it led me to get into that practice of Tantra, not necessarily Tantric Buddhism, but the Tantric practice. And that ultimately led me to what I do today, which is a practice of Nepalese shamanism, which is very, very close to the Buddhist Tantric experiences. And those are rituals chanting, using mantra, we're using rituals, we're doing fire ceremonies with the yagna. There's, all kinds of stuff, really communing with nature, with the opening myself up to all that is, to the understanding that there is a life force that interconnects every one of us as humans or plants or animals, whatever it is, and that when we tap into this all-pervasive life force, we can really learn to harness this energy to step into the truth of who we are. And so that ultimately translates into becoming self-realized and understanding that we are part of a greater consciousness, and that we're all interconnected, and that we're not, it's not just about us as one little human, So that is my life story, my spiritual path. And I hope I didn't take up too much of your time to explain that.
No, quite fascinating. But you started with saying that your parents were initiated with a guru, right? Through a
Yes.
guru.
Yeah.
And that's quite rare, especially outside India and like somewhere in Australia in those days as well, right?
Yes.
So, how important do you think it is to be initiated by a guru? Does that really change the quality of the experience compared to doing it by yourself?
That's a really interesting question. It's an important question because nowadays we have the internet, of course. Anybody can look up anything. Mantras are readily available. You can find them on Spotify or, Apple Music. And so it's really a two-part answer to that. So for me, yes, I do believe you do need one. The reason being, if a person doesn't have experience working with a guru who understands on a vibration level, on an energetic frequency level, where you're at. They can sense into you, and they can feel. And that might sound a bit weird, sensing into you. So a better description is they can feel where you're at and meet you where you're at in your life. So if you have never practiced anything, been exposed to yoga or whatever, or you grew up in an environment that was maybe not so inclusive, or just a different environment, the guru, the teacher can feel into that and recommend the mantra comes in a way. I've been through my teacher, my current teacher, who's a 27th generation Nepalese shaman. In this tradition, I have received the transmissions to work with people in this way. And so in my own experience, I have found when the mantra comes for that person, it comes from a much higher place, and I hear it mentally. It's told to me from spirit, from guidance, and then I will tell them the mantra, and it's always so remarkable how exactly right on it is for that person, for in this moment in their life where they're at. It's incredible. I'm always so amazed by that. And back years ago, decades ago, I didn't understand what any of that meant. It's sort of, and even during my 20s and in my early 30s, I was definitely like Googling stuff online and trying to find more information out and wanting to know a certain mantra for something, and or really practicing with a mantra for a while that maybe I shouldn't have been at that time. So I mean, to say, oh, there's no harm in Googling it, I think if you understand, if you have even a simple understanding, I think some mantras are, I think there's general mantras that you can look up online and kind of self-prescribe. And then I think there's other things that are designed specifically for an energetic perspective to help that person up level and release and transcend and step into something beyond themselves. I think in that aspect, you need a teacher, because you can actually have really insane experiences in terms of not being able to cope and with the energetic shifts that are happening in the body. Some people who can describe this and say the Shakti is awakening, the Kundalini is awakening, things like this. So if people have not been exposed to any of these teachings or understand what can potentially happen with the body, the experiences, there's the chance that they may find it scary, or just, oh my gosh, what's happening to me? Oh my gosh, my body shook, or things like this. And so it's good to just at least speak to someone who can help guide you. So hope that answers that question.
So then, if someone is getting into this path, the yogic path, then how do they find a guru? Because I've heard this thing from a lot of people that usually the guru finds you. But let's say you are just a normal person and you're looking to get into a path and you don't know anything, right? And you want someone to initiate you, at least some basic mantra, some practices. How or like on how do you find a guru?
Mm. So, excuse me. So, well, I mean, when I was first initiated into TM, I wasn't looking for a guru. I was living with my family. I was at home. I was told one day, okay, we're going to learn to meditate. You're going to learn to meditate, here. And so that's a unique, example. But, there's yoga studios everywhere now, especially in the West, right? They're as common as coffee shops, right? They're like everywhere. And there's no harm in going into a yoga studio and just, experiencing for yourself in a class, is this right for me? So if you're feeling drawn, this is on a basic level. If someone's feeling spiritually directed and drawn, attracted to learning how to meditate or wanting to go into a yoga class, go, like, follow that instinct, follow that guidance, step into one. You're going to know right away or very quickly in that class, does this feel right in my body? Should I be here? Am I enjoying it? And sometimes it can feel intimidating in a year. And I've also experienced this in yoga classes where there's been some classes I'll try it maybe 2 times and I'll be like, no, this teacher's not for me, or the room environment. There's a lot of people that misunderstand yoga, particularly in the West, and they're more concerned of maybe how the body is looking and shaping out to be from the practice. And you can see that right away, right? Everyone's in really skin tight clothes, looking at themselves in the mirror. Some people are more flexible than others, and sometimes that can come off as a little bit of like, oh, I can get into the poses and you can't. So that vibe is in there, as opposed to really being in that moment. Like, yoga's about feeling into the resistance in the body as a practice. Like, the physical practice of yoga is designed specifically to allow us to feel into the discomfort of the body, to feel into where we need to grow, where do we need to move through. And that gets really lost in the West because we're not teaching that in yoga classes. Not everyone's like that, not every teacher. There's some incredibly profound teachers who understand this and they talk that through. So if you're in a class where you feel uncomfortable, don't go to another one. Find another class, because there's a calling. Something's directing you to go seek that out, to feel that movement into your body, to understand what is this that's higher than me, that I'm feeling I need to do this practice. And so explore. And in the beginning, I think that's what you have to do, is really just see what works for you. I think I shared with you when we last spoke in how I was guided to. My present teacher was very mystical, and it really was in that traditional sense of when the student is ready, the guru will come. But this is, it was very unique. And so for me, I was really seeking, I should say. I knew I needed to, in order to deepen myself, my practice, I needed a very specific type of teacher, very specific type of guru, and I didn't know where to look for this person. And I knew I would feel that teacher was right when I was connected to them, but it was definitely a guided process. And when we eventually met, and it wasn't through Google searches, it wasn't through I didn't even know the path would be Nepalese shamanism. I had no idea. I just knew I actually thought it would be a teacher in the Tantric Buddhist tradition. But it wasn't. And turns out there's a lot of crossover with Nepal, Tibet, India, up in the Himalayas, and so even I think when people hear the word shamanism, they immediately think of the Amazon and ayahuasca and stuff. And so there's no plant medicine involved in the practice that I do. It is very similar to to Tantric Buddhism. So does that answer your question? I think you just need to explore and experience, and the deeper you go, you'll know. It's like a feel, like. But when you go searching,
Instinct.
for the person, I don't think you necessarily find who or what you're looking for. If you think it should be this, or if you kind of find like the trend, who's the trendy teacher of the time, and follow that. Like maybe that person's not right for you, just because it's right for all these other people doesn't mean it's right for you. So you've got to listen to yourself.
So, you mentioned that people go through spiritual experiences, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of your most memorable spiritual? I know it's very hard to describe these, but any spiritual experience that really stood out
Oh
to you,
God.
which really impacted you.
Yeah. Okay. So last year when I was in Nepal on a spiritual pilgrimage with my teacher and some other students of his, a group of us, I should say. There's some weren't necessarily students, but as a small group of us, and we were in Nepal, and we were up in the mountains. And he had arranged for us to meet with some other shamans, mountain shamans, who don't speak any English. And they were going to be performing some rituals that we could participate in. They were cleansing rituals to remove things that have been residing in the body that no longer serves, which sort of shift that energy out. And so they were very participatory. And there was also, and this one particular, and I've just got to backtrack for a moment with the understanding of your listeners that what I'm about to describe has happened to me because I'm at a stage in my own practice where I've been doing this for a long time and working with different deities and energy. And so this, there were some people who had never done any of this before, and so their experience was vastly different to mine, and I witnessed that, and I'll talk to that in a moment. So we did this one particular ritual that was about to essentially touch, commune with, or just think a better way to describe, connect with a particular spirit energy. And in this particular energy was the energy of the Nagas. So the Nagas are spirit deities, wisdom keepers of the earth that reside deep within the earth. They're also the keepers of the water. And so this is a particular deity that I work with, one of them, Naga Kanya. We were not connecting with Naga Kanya, we were connecting with Nagas from their loka, the Naga loka. And so the shamans that were performing this ritual this is what they, for lack of a better word, specialize in. Right? So they had set up the very, very specific ingredients, let's say a kalasa. So there was a copper pot, very specific things had to be procured from nature to make as offerings and so on. And it seems complicated, but at the same time, this was actually a more basic one compared to some of the other rituals which had taken hours to set up, and kinds of things were going on. So what we were doing is we were putting our hands into the water pot, into the kalasa, to see what was your connection. Were you going to experience something, if the Nagas were going to speak to you or not? And it was amazing. I mean, I described it to my family, my husband and my children, as, if you've seen the movie Star Wars, it or any of the Star Wars movies, it was like a force test, like a force sensitive test, essentially, is the best way to describe it. So how sensitive are you to these energies, these beings, and can you communicate with them? So in the most simplest way. So I was the third or fourth person to experience this, and I put my hand into the pot, the water. This day was, even though this was in October in the mountains, the daytime temperatures were still hot, like how it is in Mishikesh. You can be in the mountains in October, November, and the days are still sunny and warm, but the nights are cold. And so the daytime temperature, we were in a large room, all the windows and doors were pretty much closed because we were just smoking it up, like with incense, that would never happen in the US. But here we are, they're just burning incense like crazy. There's an actual fire going in, like in the room, like how it is. And so the room was really hot and warm, but yet when I touched the water in the kalasa, it was icy cold, and there was no ice. They hadn't used ice. They had just filled the water normally out of the tap, actually. And so the water was really cold. You could see how cold it was because the outside of the kalasa was had sort of not frost, but the beginning of sort of condensation. You could just see. And so I put my hand in the water, and immediately I felt the sensation of the energy come up my body, and it completely overtook me. Like it had embodied me. So I was so open to receiving the experience that I literally was shaking and became embodied with the energy of the spirit. And the two shamans that were there was the main shaman, and then he had an assistant shaman, and they had prepared and they had demonstrated and told us, if you do not be scared, if you feel like if this happens to you, this is what we'll be doing. And they with a specific leaf, they dipped it in the water, and then they did a line like around my upper arm, so that the energy could be drawn back out and down, and I could be regrounded, and so that it wouldn't be fully taken over, like possessed in a sense. So that didn't happen. There was no possession. Was completely aware of the whole experience. I was totally in my body, but at the same time, I could feel and experience what was happening. And right after that moment, I was like, the whole thing was probably 10 minutes. Afterwards, for about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes after, I just, I was so much more open. I could literally feel from my heart space, from these upper chakras, I could feel this whole, and actually my whole central column, I could feel the experience of the energy moving up and down beyond the Kundalini, honestly, beyond the Shakti being awakened. I could move to another place of my practice. So it was more than that. And it was this incredible expansiveness where I could suddenly, everybody in the room, other Westerners in the room, I should say, I was able to completely understand each one of them and see, like, I received like a down about this person, that person's life, this is happening in their life, this is happening in their life, this is happening, which I didn't necessarily want to be exposed to, but but I was like, whoa. And so I just kind of sat back and was like, I need to integrate. I needed to just be alone and allow the experience to integrate energetically within me, and allow that just to show me what I needed to be shown to deepen my practice and deepen myself, so that I can be of better service and work from a higher place to work with other people in this capacity. Now, this capacity, I'm not setting up a kalasa in my house and having people try out, whether they commune with the spirit or not. No way. I don't do that at all. I'm not at that level. I don't think that's not my interest, and that's not where I'm being called to work. But on the flip side, there were a handful of people who it was their very first experience with this, the very first experience with in exposure to any of this. They had found themselves there because they either came with a friend and they were curious and they wanted to see. I think they were expecting more of a tourist sort of experience of mountain shamans, and so versus understanding that no, we're on a deep pilgrimage here, and we're visiting sacred sites and also making offerings and doing work. So these people had no experience, no reaction whatsoever when they touched the kalasa, when they put their hand in the pot. Absolutely nothing happened. Nothing, like they could be just touching, the table or the floor, whatever. So it was really interesting to observe where people were at and how this spiritually was affecting them. And there were 20 of us, there were at least 8 of us had that kind of experience I just described, and the rest, it's a couple people mild experience in the hand, and then the rest nothing at all. And my teacher said, if for those of you that had no experience, do not worry. Like, it doesn't mean nothing is happening for you. It just means you're at a different place. and that there's more, you need to do more inner work, essentially. And you know how it is, like, you know, when you're in India, even like in Europe, it's just a bit more matter of fact the way people speak. It's a bit more like, you just got to go do more inner work. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. In the West, we're like, oh, it's okay, don't worry, you didn't feel, don't, you know, it's a bit more sugar coated here. Over there, it's a bit more like straight up, you know. So but that was definitely, to date, the most profound experience I've ever had, spiritually. Mind blowing. I was really like, wow. And then when I returned home, I could feel like the whole, my environment, everything just heightened. So yeah, that's my.
Does do the after effects last for a few days? Does your life, like your daily life, do you see that it changes in some way? Like, do you
Yeah. Yeah, it did. And the after effects were for quite some time, and still, you know, almost a year later, uh, when I do my practices to the Nagas, to Naga Kanya, on specific days of the week, I this is how I reconnect to that. And then there's offerings I do to the forest. I'm blessed to be living in an environment that's surrounded by nature, and that was a whole guided experience to come live where we do 2.5 years ago. And even my teacher was like, you totally are being guided to, you need to be with the spirits of the forest. So it was really interesting, and made me think a lot about the householder path, because I think this is the most difficult, which in Tantra is something that's spoken about as the householder. And what does that mean? Right? That is, you're very much in this world, present, like you can be married, you can have children, you can eat whatever you want, you're having sex, you're fully engaged in the human experience. But on the other side, you're also fully engaged in the spiritual experience with communing with deities and whatever, you know, your spirit guides and so on. But finding that balance has really been the most difficult thing, because it's very easy to get lost in the practice and to stay there for hours and to be in that realm, to cross over into the non-local or sort of regular reality, and shift states of consciousness and just be there, sort of experiencing a different way of life. And you do see that. You see the rishis, this is what they're doing. They are really in this altered state where they're receiving downloads and receiving information, and they're really connected to source, to something much higher than themselves. So finding that balance. And after I came back from Nepal, I definitely struggled with that for like a month or so. It was maybe more. It was really difficult to reintegrate into coming back into my house and day-to-day life after after being away. I was away for 3 weeks, but which doesn't seem like, that can seem like a long time or not a very long time, but it was still, it was definitely a hard thing to do.
So I'm also trying to understand, because you did this in a group, but your spiritual experience and for a few others around you was different from many others, right?
Yes.
How much of it is a singular individual, like what's the interplay in terms of individual experience versus group experience, in the sense that the kind of people with whom you practice, of course you usually don't have control over it, right? But uh, does a more enlightened group like lift the individual? Like, how do you see that dynamic
Yeah.
play out?
So a good analogy for that is when you go to the temple in India, right? You see that, especially if you're at a temple that's got very high vibration. I mean, they all do, right? But there are temples that are specific to other things. And so when you participate in the rituals at the temple, you're experiencing, because everyone is there together, doesn't matter what level you're at. You can have children there, and you can have elderly there who maybe only just go whatever, or you can have fully devout practitioners who really are there every day doing things. And of course you have the pundits and the priests who are at the looking after everything too. So that's a group experience where the higher vibration up levels everybody, and the people who are maybe not as experienced still leave feeling they receive a gift of that, right? You feel, you feel yourself, like you leave and you feel like something happened, or you were blessed, right? You have this happiness to you, this like a feeling of, okay, you know what I mean? Like something's happened here. And then when you're having you in that moment, when you're there in the group experience, if you're somebody who is more experienced, your experience of that is going to be even deeper, even more so. The deity may or may not speak to you directly, may or may not affect you, right, in some way where you're like, wow. Or when you're at home doing your practice, not in the group, and you're setting up an individual, a separate. Sorry, that's my cat meowing in the background. If you can hear it, hear her.
I thought you were showing your individual place where you practice.
That, and her name is Lakshmi, actually, the cat.
Wow.
Yeah. So coming back, when you're doing your individual practice and you're in your sacred space, that's when you can really go much deeper individually and really commune and do whatever it is your intention is for that ceremony or that ritual in that moment, because you have the privacy of your sacred space to work with, when you know how. So yeah, you can, in a group, you can still take away something. The story I just shared was, we were not in a temple and we were not at a deity, and we were not, it was a very individual thing, and it was provided to us for an experience to see, like, where they didn't describe it in that. They didn't say, hey, you want to go do this force sensitive test to see who's connected to spirit and who isn't. It wasn't described like that at all. But that's pretty much what it was. I was like, whoa, okay, amazing.
Yeah. So, one thing I want to ask you is in terms of, like, I'm sure you would have grappled with this problem, which is that when you're trying to get into a tradition, whether it was Nepalese shamanism or Tantra or yoga, in all of these scenarios, even though you were better exposed than, people around you, uh, it was still something that was from a different, like, not from your specific location. You were going into a new place, trying to find something new, explore, right? So the mind wavers. It asks a lot of questions. Sometimes, let's say you're doing a ritual, how much of your mind do you actually put into thinking, why is this being done, versus do you just embrace the process? Like, how do you deal with that?
No, I just embrace it 100%. When the aspect of my mind is where I need to remember the steps to do the ritual, with observing what's the preparation that has to happen, because I'm so involved with myself that I'm trusting and really feeling into the experience, and so I'm never questioning it, because I'm present in that moment, but afterwards I'm also experiencing the after effects, the positive after effects of how these things are shifting my life for the better, the improvements that are happening. And so I'm in constant communication with my spirit guides and spirit. And I use my practice as an opportunity to go deeper or to find out more specific things, more specific guidance on or direction on something. Or if it is, say, a ceremony, a ritual that's offering, or you say we're working with the elements as an example, that is a specific yantra that has to be set up with very specific types of offerings, not the sangri, but just other herbs and flowers and spices and fruits and things like this, and maybe limes and chilies, and depending on what it is we're working with, and or trying to release, or heal, or invoke, or give gratitude for, so the elements, we are not just in the natural world, but also reside within our bodies, what we're made up of. And so when I'm working in that capacity, I'm very aware of how those present in my body. the fire, the air, the water, how is it, the ethers, and deepening that. So yeah, for me, I don't question it at all. It's amazing. It's really amazing. My mind doesn't go to, you're crazy, this is nuts, what the heck, like, why are you doing this, or anything like that, because I've experienced enough of them, and I have quite a lot of friends that also are that do this too, where, and that's another key thing, is to be around people who are also experiencing life in this capacity, because you have shared experiences to talk to other people with. You're not crazy, like you didn't experience or hear or feel something and you're like, oh my God, what happened to me? Because you can talk to other people about it. And then later on, as time moves and you evolve and your practice deepens, then it's like, oh, wow, did you experience this too? Oh, did you hear this? Like, did the deity come to you and what did they say? Or how was the experience? And so that takes it to another level, because it's like, it's real. It's not just made up. It's not fiction, So they're ancient practices and they've been around for, time immemorial. So we've just lost touch through colonization. We've just lost touch with the truth,
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
That aspect of
True.
trusting
And
ourselves, we become so reliant on having to be told what to do and to believe other things. So
yeah, I mean, you make a very valid point there. But you, in your initial experience as well, when you were getting into the path, you mentioned that you didn't understand the deities or their energies, what it was, but you probably were focusing more on the physical aspect of it. And a lot of people who start actually funnel through that way,
mm-hmm.
they don't, and they have a lot of questions and all of that. And sometimes there is a feeling, and I'm sure you, because I know you've mentioned this offline to me as well, that people don't get the spiritual side of yoga. Like, they are hyper focused, especially this yoga studio types are hyper focused on the exercise and the physical aspect of it, but they completely lose sight of the metaphysical aspect of it. So, I mean, what do you think about that? Like, should new people, I mean, should there be some patience for them to kind of embrace the process, or because otherwise it just becomes exercise, guided exercise? How different is it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. And I've been into classes where it's hybrid yoga. Like, there's yoga and then there's like CrossFit training in there, and then you're like, what? What the heck is this? So I never went back to those classes because they were like, this isn't what it's about. And then, yeah, I mean, honestly, everybody has to experience it for themselves. What's true for you is going to be different for what's true for me. And I could feel way back when I was 18 that the practice of yoga was something, it stirred something so deeply within my body that I knew that this was a way to get to where I wanted to go in my spiritual journey. I just innately, I was aware of that. I had that awareness. Now, it doesn't mean I haven't been able to go to other yoga classes and just for fun. Like, so we can look at hot yoga as an example of this, with Bikram. And there's thousands of people who love to practice hot yoga, thousands of people. And the irony about this is, and so many of these practices that came to the West in the time before the internet, when there was no really fact checking or anything like that. The notion of hot yoga is because it's so freaking hot in India when you're practicing yoga. I mean, my God, right? Like in the summer, and people, and like workers often, like a lot of places, will encourage their employees, their workers, to come outside, take a break, practice yoga. And it's sunny, it's hot. They're in jeans and a shirt. They're not wearing skin tight fitting designer yoga clothes. They're wearing their everyday, regular, loose fitting clothing, and they've just come out to take a break, to completely move the body, get the energy flowing, to have a break. And so it's interesting because that, I don't think a lot of people realize that these are the roots of Bikram yoga. And then he's Indian. He came over to the US and heated rooms to the same temperature that, it is in the air, the outside air in India. And and Westerners are going into these classes in basically swimwear because it's so hot and practicing the asanas. Now, I've done some of these, these hot yoga classes myself, and they're really hard. They're tough to be in a space where you're like, and everyone's sweating around you, and Westerners really love to experience the sweatiness. Like, it's almost like you haven't worked hard enough if you didn't sweat in a workout, right? Like, you don't really build up a sweat in yoga. I mean, really, normally, like unless the temperature happens to be hot, your body, even when you're holding those poses for ages, you may work up a little bit, but you're not. It's not like riding a bicycle up a hill where you're naturally going to sweat because or running and jogging or whatever. So it's really interesting. I have been to a handful of hot yoga classes, and every time I was like, oh my God, like, what am I doing here? But you can't tell someone, this isn't really the practice. This is not a spiritual practice, because it's working for them, right? It's working. It's something they're enjoying. They're getting a lot out of it. There's a combination of endorphins, the sweating, all of this stuff is making them enjoy what they're doing. So there's no harm in that. If that's where they're at and that's what they're enjoying and they're getting something out of it, that's a spiritual experience for that person, right? That's where they're at. They're never going to go further. They're never going to evolve. It's just, that's where they're at. And so that's great, right? Like, that's where you're at in this lifetime. Other people are going to go, oh my God, this is like, what the heck? And they're not going to do it again. Or, these other hybrid classes, yoga classes. But yeah, I don't often go to yoga classes. I haven't for a really long time. Because it's just a different experience for me and it doesn't offer me what I'm looking for at this point in my journey. So again, everybody, it's right for you. What's right for me isn't right for someone else, and maybe they're not interested in what I'm, my practice, or they think it's crazy because I'm communing with spirits. But that is an aspect of yoga too, and that's why there's different yogas, right? There's so many. Yoga as a physical practice, the asanas, is only one aspect, which most people in the West don't realize. So they think that is it. That's yoga, is the practice. But no, actually the asana is just like stage one to prepare the body.
Yeah.
To prepare the body, right?
It's like the warm-up.
Exactly. And that's okay, and like that's fine.
Yeah.
Like whatever. Like that's why a lot of teachers have hybridized the practice to make it more physical, because there's no explanation of, now this is like a practice to create awareness, space in the body, so we can sit for a long time in meditation, so that we can receive, so that wisdom can come through and stuff. So yeah, so there's nothing wrong with that, but yeah. Got to find what works for you.
Yeah. So the trend of a lot of new age yoga gurus has taken off in India. Shri M, even Sadhguru. And I think you have kind of done most of your work with some of the traditional gurus, if I understand right. So, but I'm sure you're aware of them and their practices as well. So, do you see any difference between the two, like in general, from what you understand? Uh, how different is the experience on this side and the other side, or are there even sides?
This side meaning the West, the Western.
No, but I mean like new age spiritual traditions like Shri and Sadhguru,
Okay.
vis-a-vis some of the traditional gurus from a lineage.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. I think, again, there's something for everyone, and so Sadhguru is great. I think what he's putting out into the world is authentic. There's a lot of Vedic teachings he's explaining and sharing and bringing, and of course, being from the Vedas, it's linked to a lineage. Now, he may not be like, oh, my practice, I come from, this lineage, and I can show it to you, and, here it is on a chart that I go back. But in the Vedic teachings, I mean, that's where yoga comes from. That is where, Ayurveda comes from, the Vedas. Tantra comes from the Vedas as the esoteric aspect of the Vedas. So So he's definitely putting that out into the world. I mean, he's explaining how people can connect to themselves in different ways, and there's also aspects of being able to chant and creating this space. I kind of think of it similarly to Sri Aurobindo. I haven't been to his place in Pondicherry, but it's almost like Oroville in a sense that there's a community of like-minded people who really want to experience something more than themselves in a supported environment and do deep work and experience life in a different, more profound way so that they can be of service to others. And that doesn't mean, you know, cleaning or whatever, right? Come and cleaning someone's house. Being of service is how can I be a higher guidance to somebody who needs that support? What is the, savor? I think there's a lot of misinterpretation around savor as well in the West, but that's another conversation. But it's so it's not culty, right? So I don't think Sadhguru is culty, and I think there's definitely been other people in the past maybe who weren't staying so true to teachings, and people were being drawn to it, and other stuff was going on, and it became just kind of veered off the path. But again, it really just comes down to what's right for everybody. I really was seeking to understand these deeper aspects. I could feel it in my body, and I was being guided to explore the deeper meaning of yoga and how it is a path of self-realization and what that exactly means. And so that is what I teach when I work with clients now. It's something that I think is really important for people to understand. But I think if someone's drawn to another guru, they want to go to Amma, they want to Sri, they feel, there's nothing wrong with that, because again, you're going to know, just like going into a Western yoga class, you're going to know very quickly, is this right for me? And that's what you've just got to listen to, that inner voice. You've got to always listen to, is this right for me? Just because it's right for your best friend who's enamored by this person doesn't mean it's right for you. And you have to have the discernment to feel that and trust your own inner guidance to say, get out of here, these people are a bit crazy. Or, no, you know what? All right, maybe I'll give it another go and see. I'll spend the rest of the week here since I've paid for it. Or, you know what? I'm not feeling it in my body. Or like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing ever. I can totally see why everybody loves him or her. Wow, this is amazing. But it's very easy in those moments to also observe the greater, group in this moment of love where they're all like, oh, wow. And also sometimes people question, how come I'm not feeling like that? Right? They're watching everybody around them enamored, and they're not having that experience. So that's something, again, you've got to listen to. Why aren't you having that experience? Because you're not meant to be there. That's not the right person for you. So, again, nothing's right or wrong. It's just it's right or wrong. What's right for you? You have to trust what's right for you.
As an extension of what I asked you about yoga just becoming sometimes a physical practice, also, like many a times it gets divorced from the philosophy, right? And there is also sometimes this narrative that yoga is just like a form, it's a practice, but it's like some people try to say that it's not part of Hinduism. Like yoga is just a practice, it's not linked to Hinduism at all. What do you think about it? Do you think it can be treated as a separate practice, delinking it from Hinduism?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So I'm not a scholar, so I'm going to speak to it from a personal
From an
experience.
experiential,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And so I'm obviously not Hindu. I'm a Westerner,
yeah,
and that wasn't, it's my understanding that
of
to
course,
become Hindu, you have to be born into a Hindu family. It's not like Judaism where you can convert to become Jewish, right?
yeah,
Or
yeah,
Buddhism, you can
yeah.
become a Buddhist. So I'm obviously not Hindu. So I'm having these experiences outside of being a part of a religion or whatever. Um, but because it's so linked to it is a Vedic teaching, it's sort of, it could be something that's a part of, a Hindu's lifestyle. It doesn't mean you have to be Hindu, and I would imagine most Westerners aren't Hindu, all right? Unless you were somehow you became Hindu, I don't know. But so it doesn't have to be, this. It's not a.
So I would separate those two things. Like, it's not that you have to become a Hindu to practice yoga, but you can be anyone and practice yoga,
Mhm.
but still yoga is part of a Hindu tradition. In that way, I
Yes.
mean, not
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. For
yeah.
sure. For sure. Yes, it is part of a Hindu tradition. Yes, and I think for sure it is. But yeah, you don't have to be, a Hindu to be practicing, or to feel these, because they're uh, so ancient, and they really work. There's a reason yoga works. There's a reason people have incredible experiences, because it's been designed. My understanding of it is this is a cosmic practice. We get really esoteric if you want. It's, the Sanskrit is a cosmic language. It is not. It's different to speaking Hindi, right? So, or Bangladeshi. Many people can't actually speak Sanskrit anymore in India. So there's different dialects in India, as you know, but there's only a handful of people that speak Sanskrit. So it's interesting. So we could bundle it. It could be put into the category of it's a Hindu practice because it's from India, but I think it's beyond that. I think it's older. It's older than that, and that's why it transcends space and time and religions, and that's why everybody can practice it, and it's all pervasive, because it really transcends that and our ability, to just live these insular lives. So everyone should practice
Yeah.
yoga.
You mentioned about Tantra. Have you gone through any exceptional tantric experience in your practices, like anything that you can recount?
Oh yeah, I mean they happen interestingly. So I've been to India a number of times, and I have a friend who has a wonderful yoga place up in Rishikesh, up in the mountains actually. And whenever I'm there and we're doing fire ceremonies, uh, uh, you can feel the energy, the shift of the mountains, the nature spirits around, and they're really incredible. Especially when we're chanting and we're making the offerings into the fire. There's been a number of times where I've just experienced this on such a deep level, where it's this communing with something again that's greater than myself. And usually the people that are there at that time are around a similar level of practice, been doing it for a long time, understand what we're doing, and so it's this really incredible experience that I'm having with a shared group experience in this moment, where afterwards, when we're done chanting whatever the mantra is, and doing all the offerings, it's really like, wow, like, and there's no other way to describe it than an openness occurs, like an openness from above, as if I'm receiving, like, or channeling all this information, that just like things just start to come down, like ideas and whatever I was already thinking, say about a book, or that I want to, or maybe an idea for something, like things will just start really pouring down through and really coming, and I'm tapping into something, a greater force that's supporting me in how I need to be supported in that moment, and guiding me to, like, or I'll also be having epiphanies, moments of like realizing something and going, oh, oh God, okay. And something I had buried deep in my subconscious that I had just forgotten about or thought I had healed. And, it'll suddenly come to the forefront. And but sometimes as a vision, but also as a feeling. And it's like, this aha moment. That's why, the realization of something. And then I'm like, huh. And it lets it go. It's like it just dissolves from my being. So those have been very profound experiences too. And I think if I had not had those profound experiences prior to being guided to my shamanic practice, it perhaps might have been different. So they're very, yeah, they're amazing. And again, you need to be that the tantric practice can get quite advanced in terms of the rituals and the mantras being used and so on. And so that's a practice you really want to be with a teacher, or at least somebody who knows exactly the step, what they're doing, what's happening in that moment. So you're not just being exposed to stuff. You've no idea what's going to happen.
So, lastly, you mentioned that you've traveled to India many times. How has your experience been traveling to India, meeting people, and just general observations?
I love your country. I love it. I really love to visit. I'm toying between, do I go back to Nepal in October or do I come to India, because I haven't been since before COVID, and before I was going every year, almost every year. And yeah, it's every time is exciting. And obviously India is as a unique country. I often wonder to myself, is it because I lived in Asia, Southeast Asia, as a child, that there's almost like this feeling of coming home, a familiarity. I'm not afraid to be there as a woman. When I'm married and I have children, but I've only ever been by myself, with one exception where I went with a film crew when I was shooting a documentary series in India. And often people here will say, "Oh my God, you're going to India by yourself? Aren't you afraid of it? You're a woman." Oh, and I'm like, I'm not getting on. I'm not putting myself in danger. I'm not. And you could be in New York City as a woman walking down, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You need to have awareness and street smarts and pay attention, you know, because something awful can happen to anybody, God forbid, anywhere in the world. There are bad people everywhere, but there are also amazing good people everywhere. And so, but when I travel to India, there's definitely this immediate sense of like, I've returned. Not necessarily, oh, I'm home, but like this, oh, I've returned, I'm back, I feel comfortable. I know how to dress in the environment as a female. Not wearing sundresses with little straps or top, like never wearing, a bikini, let's say. I'm always very respectful of the customs and how people are doing things. And when we enter the temples, I just find it to be a really amazing place, and I hope that more young Indian people realize what a special place they're being raised in. Realize there's a lot of different things going on as well, politically, and shifts and other stuff. And, there's a lot of other things, but there's still really amazing things that can be discovered in India. I think, and also as an Indian person growing up there.
How do you, like, spiritually, how do you find, like, our Indian people, especially in cities? How do you find their attitude towards spirituality? Because India's image is, it's a spiritual country, people are spiritual. Do you really feel that when you go to the big cities?
Yes. Yeah, I do. So I've been to the big city. I've been to Kolkata and to Mumbai and to Delhi. And you do feel that. For me, I think it's because there's temples everywhere. I mean, you can't walk down a street without seeing a temple. And if it's not a massive temple, it's a small temple, or it's a shrine, or it's a pop-up shrine, right? There's a pop-up temple somewhere. And when you go into a place, everybody greets you, namaste, and and you can feel the heart connection when you're bowing to somebody. And then there's some people who are also grumpy and maybe whatever, just what are you doing here, or but you get that everywhere. But no, I have always felt that um, it's a spiritual place. And interestingly, each part of the country, I've also been to um, Bhuvaneshwari in Odisha,
What is it?
Orissa. So that's that's not as large, but very different energy there. Very, very different. Like almost more sort of mystical in a sense. Like there's like esoteric practices going on there that people don't know about. Like there's like, whoa, there's like this undertone of like some really serious stuff that's happening in a very mystical way. And I actually had a mystical experience there up in the mountains. But it's yeah, that's different. But then in the cities, it's easy for those things to be masked because there's so many more people. There's so much more going on. and so it's in the countrysides, even in, like, you go to Haridwar, and that experience there, of course, the thing about Haridwar is a holy city, and you have that experience of the RT there in the evenings, and that's just really fun. I mean, everybody's loving. Everyone's getting into it, and that's every night, just about, right? They're like, and they're all getting into it. And people will travel for like a long distance to go and experience that. So yeah, it puts a smile on my face just thinking about it.
Great. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Tatyana, it was a great conversation with you. I had a lot of fun, and I hope it was the same for you as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It
Yes,
was lovely.
absolutely.
Very great.
So, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, signing off.